Good afternoon. I'm Loretta Randolph, and I'm a member of the Weatherhead School of Management, MOD and MPOD Alumni Association, and we're here today speaking with Dr. David Cooperrider, Distinguished University Professor and Faculty Director of the Fowler Center for Business as Agent of World Benefit. Good afternoon, David.
How are you doing, Loretta?
I'm doing well. As we have mentioned, we are interviewing all of the faculty in the Department of Organizational Behavior because all of you are founders of the field. We thought it important to record and capture your stories about your work and your career, and then we'll be putting that together and gifting it back to the Department of Organizational Behavior. I'd like to start out by having you talk to us about how did you get here? How did you get into the field, and how did you get to Case Western Reserve?
It is an interesting story. I mean, I was studying social psychology, and I was very interested in group dynamics and so on in college. And my third year in college, I had a chance I got a Lilly Foundation grant to study in Japan. And on that trip, I have to say it was one of the most profound kind of just trips that moments that I'd ever had. And, I was a young kid. I came from a poor family. I had never been on a plane before. That was the first time. I think I was about 18 years old, my first time ever on a plane. So the cross-cultural impact of that was huge, and I'll never forget on one day we went to Hiroshima, and it was like an atomic bomb of awareness went off inside of my chest, and it was like I just felt things that I hadn't felt before, and a question came to my mind, and the question was something like, what are we going to discover in the human sciences and in the science of human relationships that is as powerful as the atomic bomb is in a negative sense, but in a positive sense? What are we going to discover? And, that day I just felt like it wasn't the feelings of kind of anguish, but it was like the miracle of life on this planet. That's what hit me, and how it's in our hands. And so that really led me to want to study groups and relationships and human organization, because that's what human organization is about. They're centers of human relatedness, and so I went on, got my master's in organization development. While I was working on that at George Williams College, I came across Carl Rogers' first book on the T group. It was called Encounter Groups, and he declared that the encounter group and the T group was the most important social invention of the 21st century, in the sense that now we could shine a light on human relationships the way we could things in physics and engineering, and that we had the capability to really improve those. And he talked about all the different levels of meaning for relationships, for families, for communities, for organizations. And then he went as far as international relations and global change efforts, and I thought that is an amazing field. And I started looking around for the best program in the country for the PhD and the master's, and I was instructed by one of my professors, Bob Landis, that Case Western was the place to be, that it was the pioneer of this whole field, and as I looked at it, it's the only place I applied to. I wanted to be here.
Yeah. And so how did you move then from a PhD student, and now you're a distinguished university professor, so you spent your whole academic career here?
Yeah, I came in 1979, so I started looking back at the years. But I feel like I was born under a lucky star. I mean, to have landed here, and just the great professors that I had a chance to work with and learn from, the best in the field, So with Suresh Srivastava, he was the chair of our department at that time, and I can never forget the first day I arrived here, and he he said something like, Cooperrider, forget everything you've ever learned about organization development. It's going to be a whole new approach as you come here. And, and then the chance to learn with people like David Kolb, and his massive scholarship on experiential learning and tracing with John Dewey and Piaget, and the chance to learn with people like Eric Nielsen, great sociologist from Harvard, who just had such an incredible mind. The chance to learn from people like Ron Fry, who came from MIT and studied with people like Richard Beckhardt and others, Dave Kolb, the chance to learn with, Friedlander. Frank had written the most important review of all of the field of organization development with David Brown, who then went to Harvard. So, it just felt like a treasure house. It was just incredibly lucky, and every day I felt like this could be the most important field in the world today, as we look at the global issues of our day, as we look at the challenges of inclusion, as we look at the organization dimensions of global change. I felt like in a world that's built around a society of organizations, I felt like I landed in exactly the right place to take part in some of the major issues of our day.
I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about your work. And I think when we are doing what we were born to do, if you will, or if we have a knowing that what we're doing is right for us. Yeah. When was it for you that you realized that, and not only were you doing the right thing, but when you first realized the impact your work was having on the world? Can you tell me a little bit about when that was for you, and how did you know you were having such an impact on the world?
Yeah. First of all, one of the things that Suresh stressed from the moment was the power of ideas and the scholarship of ideas. And I think that's what he meant when he said to forget a lot of the kind of intervention practices, but just to become a great scholar. And after I wrote the first paper on appreciative inquiry in our studies of the Cleveland Clinic, which is now the #1 heart center, one of the best medical centers in the world. Just that single publication brought conversations from all over the world. So you could begin, even at that early stage. I started writing about appreciative inquiry in about 1982. And even at that early stage, you could begin to feel the power of good scholarship and reverberation of ideas. Appreciative inquiry was it became the subject matter. It emerged in my dissertation work with the Cleveland Clinic. And what I realized at the time was that in the fields of organization development, and honestly every helping profession, whether it's in psychology or social work or industrial relation, everything was built around kind of this metaphor that the world is a problem to be solved. Therefore, if that's the root metaphor or root image, then what does it mean to be a good organizational change person? It means to have good diagnostic tools. What does it mean to be a change agent like with McKinsey? It means to be able to diagnose the real problems. And all of a sudden it hit me that if our goal is generative theory and ideas that open the world to new possibilities, if that's our aim in change, to open the world to new possibilities, I started to realize how constraining that problem-based, let's call it a deficit-based theory of change was, where all the questions you ask are all basically diagnostic and deficit-focused. And all of a sudden, going back to that experience in Hiroshima, where there was just this flash of the miracle of life on this planet, and how we don't feel that, and how special that reawakening is. If we see the world as special and precious, and certainly human organizations special and precious, when I ask people the high point moments in their lives, it's always in some kind of group. It's always in some kind of collective action, some adventure, some innovation, some purposeful movement where we come together to create a better world. And so we start saying, wait a second, organizations aren't problems to be solved. They're miracles of human interaction, filled with infinite imagination, infinite capacity to create, infinite capacity to connect with strength upon strength, inside and outside. So instead of the world as a problem, how about organizational life and with a life-centric focus? What is it that's giving life to this living system when it's most alive? With that shift in question, all of a sudden, we began to see tremendous opportunities and momentum for change. An appreciative inquiry developed all kinds of powerful questions to lift up the true, the good, the better, the possible, to search for what gives life in an intellectually vivid way. And so that's what my dissertation tracked, was how just the sheer act of asking questions that elevate capacities, strengths, what gives life, the true, the good, the better, the possible, everything that helps us develop a greater vision of the future. What we found is every time we asked those questions, the organization moved in a direction of increasingly better and better. And so appreciative inquiry, then, as we published papers, Suresh and I, the early papers on that, people began to say, this is kind of a radical reversal of what the field's been about. And it was radical. I think when we look at the, helping professions, let's say medicine and so on, 80% of the focus is on what's wrong or broken, what are the symptoms. And we reverse that, reverse that 80-20 tendency. And as we did that, a number of things happened where people said, oh my gosh, this brings out the best in our system so quickly. Could we include more people? Mm-hmm. So instead of just doing planning in groups of 6 to 8, like strategic planning, you've got 6 to 8 people at the time. All of a sudden people said, can we include this stakeholder group, this stakeholder group? So that's when we started working with the very large group appreciative inquiry things. And oh my gosh, the adventure and the privilege of working on things that I never would have imagined, that it all began to unfold.
You've had a lot of adventures in your life, but the thing that you've not changed is where your academic home is, and that's here. And you've talked a lot about what your experiences were like when you joined the department. What other things give life to this department? What is it about this department that has allowed you to do the phenomenal work that you've done?
I think there's 3 or 4 things that are just deeply embedded in the DNA of this culture. One is following kind of Kurt Lewin's tradition. Kurt Lewin was, when he developed the action research methodologies and so on, his quest was very normative, to build a better world, and it was always to knock at the door of bigger questions, the most complex issues of the day, like for him it was race relations and so on. And so I think that's a spirit here in our department. We're always knocking at the door of the next stages of human possibility, knocking at the door of the unknown. And in that sense, this place has been seen by the Academy and other universities around the world as just continuously pioneering, breaking new ground, challenging the status quo, opening up areas for discovery that hadn't happened before. So that pioneering spirit has been important. The second is the combining of research, good theory and good practice in this generative theory kind of way. And that's this, that good theory comes from engaging in the real world, and engaging in the real world is benefited by good theory. So that combination effect there. I think the third is this holistic perspective of the whole human being. So if we say that the foundation of our field is the interhuman, it's the human element, and especially the interhuman element. Going back to the early days of the T group, about the fundamental core and unit of inquiry is relatedness. Well, with all of that, we've taken a very holistic view of the person. So our culture, we are working with each other in a collaborative learning atmosphere, first of all, very equality and egalitarian students, faculty, you often can't tell the difference, but also holistically, we work with each other to develop the full human potential at the emotional level, the spiritual level, the cognitive, intellectual, and so that's, I think, the third characteristic, this holistic approach. And then for me, I think the stature of our place, the research that's flowing out of here over the years has just been so impactful that we do get important calls. It's a great place. It's not an ivory tower form of scholarship here, so we get calls like, I remember when I got a call from the office of the Dalai Lama. And they said, we have heard about appreciative inquiry. We have heard how it helps bring people together across conflict divides. We've read papers. And His Holiness was in Jerusalem recently. He was with a lot of, he saw the tensions in the world in a way he hadn't seen them before. Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, all these groups fighting each other in the name of God. And there was an investment banker, a great executive with him, and said, Dalai Lama, what would you like to do? And Dalai Lama said, if only the world's religious leaders could know each other, the world would be a better place. We don't know what's in each other's hearts. And so the banker said to him, I'll help support you. What would you like to do? He said, I'd like to create this new kind of dialogue around at the very highest levels of our religions, because the higher up we go, the less interaction. Right. There's no images, for example, of a pope and a Dalai Lama hugging each other. Right. Like we have Nelson Mandela, black and white and de Klerk holding each other's hands. We don't. And so, we got a call. And it was stunning, and I was shocked. And wait a second, I'm a business school professor. What am I doing here? But our school has created that kind of platform where our work really is relevant to the most complex issues of our day. And that's just a thrill. I have to say, I could say more about that whole experience and the meetings that we held all over the world. And today there's a center called the United Religions Initiative to end religious violence in the world and create culture. And it has over 900 centers doing this interfaith work using appreciative inquiry. So I think, this school is so respected, and it is at such a level of scholarship and normative intention to build a better world that we get called into some amazingly complex and beautiful things.
And the answer is yes. It's not. It sounds like it's an environment that encourages you to do that kind of work.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
doesn't put barriers up, for example, but
Right.
creates a container for you to do that work.
Right. Yep. And I was completely out of my league, you know.
It was
I
a
mean,
long time ago, United Religions, wasn't it?
And this year, what I've heard is that as an organization, they've been nominated for a Nobel Prize
Wow.
in 2018. So we'll see. But it's, you know, not many Nobel Prizes go to organizations. They almost always go to individuals. So, but it's just growing and it's captured the imagination of people. And we live in a world where we are on the edge in terms of so many conflicts. And so learning how to bridge all of those boundaries and diversities and cultural perspectives is part of the kind of the call of our time.
We've talked about your journey, how you got to where you are, your work. I want you to talk a little bit about your hopes for the future of the field.
Yeah.
And we want to, or we look to the future built on what we know of the past, but we also have hopes and dreams. So
Right.
what are your hopes and dreams for the field?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think I'll describe this concept of the discovery and design of positive institutions. So you know that through the appreciative inquiry, and then some years later, Marty Seligman, when he was president of the American Psychological Association, called for kind of a revolution in the human sciences. And so the positive psychology field was born in a formal kind of way. And I have to say that shift was really important. It was big. At the time, around 2000, there were 44,000 journal articles, and there was a study of those 44,000 journal articles, and 98.9% of those articles were what's wrong with the human being. You know, anger, fear, depression, codependency, breakdown in families, and so on. And so when he was president of the APA, Marty said, well, how about at least a 50-50? Why not a psychology of human flourishing and human strengths? So that was important. And when he called for that, he talked about three domains, three pillars of study. The first is the study of positive human emotions like hope, inspiration, and joy. All we had been studying was anger, fear, and depression. The second was the study of positive human strengths like character strengths like wisdom and courage and sense of humanity and so on. And the third was the discovery and design of positive institutions. So that's the one that's been neglected the most. And Ron Fry and I got started really addressing that question when we launched a major study into new forms of positive business. And the title of the project was called Business as an Agent of World Benefit. And we started lifting up stories. We created a worldwide appreciative inquiry where students all over the world can download our interview guide and go find in their regions business as a force for peace in high conflict zones, business as a force for eradicating extreme poverty, business as a force for this transition to a bright green and post-fossil fuel renewable energy world. And the stories started pouring in, and as they did, it started to dawn on us that here was our definition of positive institutions. That positive institutions, not only they do three things, that they serve to elevate our highest human strengths, what we were focused on with appreciative inquiry, how to elevate the true, the good, the better, the possible, and the best in human systems. Secondly, they magnify those capacities. So it's not just individual strengths and capacities, but the reverberations, the magnifying effect, like when we bring 1,000 people in the room with an appreciative inquiry summit to plan a real future. You see this concentration effect of strengths. And then the third circle of what I'll call the strengths revolution in management and leadership and change is not just the elevation and not just the magnification and concentration effective strengths to help propel positive change, but now building institutions that bring our highest human strengths out into society. So, we don't often think of institutions as vehicles for bringing more wisdom into the world, more compassion into the world, more love into the world, more sense of justice into the world. But that's what I think now is the North Star for organization development. I think organization development, the call of organization development is to begin thinking at a world stage. How do we harness in this society of organizations that we live in the capacities of business and society and positive institutions? So I think that the North Star for me is the discovery and design of positive institutions that are able to help us make this moment in history one of the greatest positive transition moments in history. And my last comment on it, when you say, what's my vision of it? And the vision of it came from another remarkable time when Kofi Annan called us when he was Secretary General of the United Nations and said, I'm hosting the largest meeting in history between CEOs and the UN to look at how do we eradicate extreme poverty in the world and so on. So we were asked to facilitate that session with the large group appreciative inquiry methodologies. But what we saw was that all of a sudden now the field could participate on a much larger world stage. In other words, maybe we start, the next stage of the field is to say, that institutions aren't our clients. Think about it, positive institutions, not as the clients of organization development, but now they are the change agents. All of a sudden then you can start dealing systemically with major issues, and there's no question in my mind that we're living in one of those it's no longer utopian to talk about creating a world of 100% renewable energy and transitioning from this fossil fuel era to a post-fossil fuel. That's a once-in-a-civilization type change opportunity. It's no longer utopian to talk about complete eradication of extreme poverty within a generation, and it's no longer utopian to talk about every child in school at some point, or maybe, with the incredible period of peace that we've been in, maybe the institution of war no longer has to be there, because organizations are places that are healthy and help us build this better world. So that's my North Star. I think that I can't wait to look back 30 years from now and see how our field, through the transition from the micro of the organization to the macro systemic kinds of changes, the impacts that have happened. Yeah.
And based on what you said, the department here will be knocking at the door. And how do you educate people to do that?
How do you educate people to do that, and then study it and track how it is that human strengths are magnified by institutions themselves? Yeah. Yeah.
One last question, and then feel free to add anything else or ask anything. How do you want your work and yourself to be remembered?
How do I want it to be remembered? That we helped create a reawakening of the miracle of life on this planet. That it's when we feel that we're able to kind of stand in front of our subject matter and say, this is a miracle, this is a gift. So let us lift up all of those assets and strengths and really see humanity for what it is. We have a hard time seeing the good in human systems. Our media is more than 90% deficit focused, and we have a hard time taking in the kind of amazingly gifted and spiritual and capable human beings we are. But if we can't see that, then all of this precious progress won't be seen. So, for example, in the early 1800s, over 90% of the world's population was in extreme poverty. That number is completely reversed. And within about 10 more years, there's only going to be about 4 or 5% of people in extreme poverty. We're living in this progress, and we need to be able to see it. So I'd like us to kind of take this idea of in Albert Schweitzer, called reverence for life. He talked about that ethical affirmation of life as the source of all new thought. And what if we could wrap the planet in some kind of appreciative intelligence where we are lifting up on a daily basis everything that helps give us potential for the future, the true, the good, the better, the possible, and able to kind of see the future in the texture of the actual. That's what we're trying to do with this world inquiry into business as an agent of world benefit. But I think if we can contribute to that kind of global learning mechanism that helps us go beyond experiential learning, because we can't learn through experience with everything. Like one nuclear holocaust, it's irreversible in consequences. So we have to learn in the imagination and mind, and I think that's what appreciative inquiry can do, help us develop this kind of global appreciative inquiry capacity.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts, comments, questions?
No, but I want to thank you, Loretta, and all the MPOD and MOD students over the years, the alumni of this community, and our PhD students. It's just so impressive, the work that's happening and the kind of graduates that are there. I remember taking a group of MPOD students with us to the United Nations, to take part in that event. And I think of great scholars that have come out of here, like Huggy Rao, he's a chair at Stanford, and Mike McCaskey some years back went on at Harvard, and I'm just so proud of our school, the impact, our faculty, the colleagueship here. It's been a wonderful place, and I just feel so lucky. I feel like every moment of life is a surprise and a privilege.
Well, thank you very much.
Yep.
It's been a real pleasure, David.
Yep.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Thank you.